The Feudal Future Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Feudal Future Podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we're going to be talking about jobs and education. And to help us do that, we've got two wonderful guests. Ginger Baxter is Assistant Dean at the Argyros College of Business and Economics. It's a mouthful to say. She's in charge of career development and student success. And Tom Piechota, who is Dean of the Fowler School of Engineering at Chapman University. Tom, Ginger, welcome. Let's kick it off, shall we?
Yeah, I maybe the first thing to ask both of you is, when I was growing up, and even up until recently, the idea was you got a degree in business, engineering, and that was your ticket. Is that no longer the case?
Wow.
Easy question, right?
Let's start with an easy one. I think it's a dynamic that's changing. I think employers are looking for skills as much as they are also looking for commitment. So a college education is a commitment to self-development and lifelong learning. However, I think we have to layer in some of these micro-credentials and some of these universally accepted principles, maybe like project management, because project management is one of the top 10 most searched skills on LinkedIn. So as we understand what the marketplace and how it's changed, right? Because technology is being used to connect the partnerships, right? The student who has the skills coming out of college with the demand that the employer has, we're going to have to always stay on top of our game and say, what do our employers want? And what do our students have? Where are the gaps? How can we fill it in? So I think it's just this beautiful blend of putting it all together. I don't know what you're seeing in engineering.
No, I think it's a lot of the same things. I would say, the last couple of years had been pretty tough for a lot of our students, honestly. I mean, it's just the job market was tough for them to enter into. Part of it is they're competing with professionals also in some of these jobs, and that might have been like the change from when we graduated. We probably weren't in that same environment where we were competing with people that had 5 years of experience. So I think for some of these jobs now, I think they face that. So I think what we try to focus on is how do they build their resume while they're at college also, right? There's a lot of things you can do to build your resume while you're at college. It could be through internships. Internships are tough to get sometimes. But it could be just things that you're doing in college also, whether you're doing research with a professor or you're involved in a professional society and showing that as part of that. And I think that starts to distinguish them a little bit more and show some experience.
Well, Ginger, you mentioned this notion of micro-credentialing, and I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on that for a second, because it sounds to me that first of all, a micro-credential, for those of you who don't know out there, is something that you get from some online course or some course that you take that is recognized in industry as stamping that you know something about a particular topic, right?
Sometimes, right. You could do like Google Analytics, and that would show that you have some marketing street cred because you understand how to connect the dots when they're doing ad campaigns and things of that nature. You're also seeing employers used to have these management development programs and management trainee programs, and now they expect most of their folks to come in fully baked, all the way trained, right? So what you're seeing is the employers are creating job simulations. So you may learn something in the classroom, then the employer, and this is on a platform right now, it's called Forage. They're going to go in and the employer, and it's big brands, guys. Am I allowed to talk about brands?
Yes.
Okay. So it's like CBRE, it's going to be Bank of America, it's going to be JP Morgan, it's going to be BCG, it's going to have Accenture. And they're going to say, here's the situation, here's the problem, please try and solve it. Then they're going to show how they solved it in the workplace. And so the students are going to get both parts of it. They're going to get the academic component, how it linked to their education, and then the employer component, how the employer is using that skill. They then earn a badge that they can document and they can reference on their CVs and on their resumes, as well as on their social media. So it's really a cool new way of helping students, what we campus to career, right? Connecting what you're doing in the classroom directly to what you're doing on the job and in business.
So why don't we just teach only that? I mean, if that's what really, if it's all about getting a job, why is it that we teach them other stuff? And obviously I'm being a little sarcastic here because there's, as a highly degreed person myself, I'm hoping that some of the stuff I've learned in my life is of value. But why is it that we don't teach just that kind of vocational training stuff?
Well, part of this gets at why do you get a 4-year degree, right? It's part of the question there. So I think part of this is, I think the expectation is that like when students graduate in computer science and engineering, you've got that foundation, right? So really they want something on top of that. Right. And even our accreditors actually ask for this now. So how do you make them, how do students grow and become well-rounded while they're at college also? That's part of it, because they could sit at home and take online courses on machine learning and AI and other things. But then the question is, yes, they have the skills, but are they ready for their workforce? And are they ready to go work in teams, work on projects where they need to understand systems and team dynamics and leadership and communications and other things. And I think that's what they get when you go to college. We try to create those and simulate those experiences for students where they're testing out those skills and working on projects that, we hope are real life. They're never really going to be real life. And sometimes they're, we make them up on our own. But, we can simulate that for them. And then when they go to talk on an interview, more than likely they're going to be asked about a project that they worked on. And our students will talk about the Grand Challenge project that they worked on probably because we simulated that and now they're able to talk about that.
But one of the ways of getting those skills has always been apprenticeships and having some sort of hands-on experience working at a company, getting an internship. Apprenticeship was going back to the days of the guilds. So what I'm concerned with is it getting harder to get an internship? And if that's the case, why? Because I hear it from my own daughter. So what are you seeing on the ground?
So I would tell you internships are a little more challenging these days because the employer partners want to make sure that the student that they bring in could turn into a full-time hire. So they're being very selective in what they're doing. And the employer is also being very intentional on what that internship experience is. They want to make it good for both sides. Gone are the days of the intern going and grabbing coffee and bringing it back. They want to have real, meaningful, impactful opportunities. I also think you're going to see with the internships that students are also being choosy on their end, right? So there's a selectivity going in both ways. Before, we would say start with a part-time job. I think when we talk internships versus part-time jobs, that's a really cool conversation because it goes back to high school. So it's not necessarily happening here in college, but it's back in high school. Most of your high school students who are looking for and attending for your universities, many of them, not all of them, but what they did in high school was they took a lot of AP classes. So they replaced those part-time jobs with more deep knowledge at the high school level. And so they didn't have as many early experiences. So one of the professors I was working with at another university, he said, Ginger, your role is not to help train these students for a job. Your role is to give them more experiences so they can learn how to become professional. And that's a distinction that has made a big impact on how we approach things because professionalism has a component of generational, right? The people that are hiring of possibly maybe of a different generation have a different expectation of what it is to be a professional. So the more experiences we give them, whether they're internships or their experiential learning and baked into the classroom, the more connectivity that we can have, the more guidance and mentorship is going to make a huge impact on how they see their whole career unfolding. I want to talk about one little thing that you said that reminds me that I talk about with a lot of folks. And I think we do a beautiful job, Marshall, because I do get to work with you, of training our students on the language of business. They can calculate the ROI, right? They can do a discounted cash flow. These are business students, but we have to work really hard on teaching them the language of work. And that's a very nuanced and different way of thinking of it.
This reminds me of when we look at a lot of this studies of when you talk to executives, you say, well, what is your biggest problem with the students? It doesn't seem to be technical skills. It seems to be their ability to be like regular human beings, particularly these kids coming out of the COVID experience, is saturated with the social media stuff. Is there any way you can address that issue? Because we hear over and over again from employers, I don't want to hire these people because, they think they just hired and now they have a 6-week vacation or something.
No, I think there are a lot of great ways that you can address it. I can tell you the way we address it is like, and our film school does it the same way. And from day one for us, we want students to see themselves as engineers and working with engineers and scientists. So to do that, put them into situations where they're working together in teams, they're developing leadership skills, they're having to communicate and develop kind of those, they like to call them softer skills, whether they're soft or hard. I think that's for people to decide. But if you do that right away, then it becomes part of like what they're doing in their education, and they're going to experience that, and employers are going to see that as kind of the added piece of what they do also. So like, for instance, I mentioned the Grand Challenges Initiative for our freshmen and sophomore students.
Yeah, talk a little bit about what that is, because I think it's a fascinating topic.
So like I said, from day one, the students come in, they work on Grand Challenges. Grand Challenges can be everything from curing cancer to food security to climate change. We all can think of
the big ones.
Right.
But they narrow it down to something very specific that they can work on. Give an example of the team that won this year. We like to partner with industry on this too, because industry always has needs to address these challenges. So one of the Layer Jot was one of our industry partners, and they do a lot in the healthcare space with just hands or being healthy or being clean. And they wanted to use AI for hand compliance on washing your hands. So the students' project really was to use AI to detect whether people were washing their hands properly in a healthcare environment, and they won the team. And what a great experience, because the students had to develop that. These are freshmen and sophomore students.
Wow.
By the way.
And they developed like a way of monitoring what
they were testing out, doing like early stage kind of testing of it, right?
Wow.
And working with that industry partner too. So it's a great experience. They didn't necessarily have all those technical skills, but that's okay. They find out kind of where to get that, whether they ask experts or look it up, but then they get to do it in a team environment also. And I think that's
very cool.
I guarantee you every student in that group, when they go to an employer interview now, they're going to ask them something. Along the way, they're going to ask them something about what they've worked on, and they'll use that as kind of...
Well, and the idea of being able to use AI as something that validates that they have a broader span of knowledge is really kind of cool. But, both of you in this conversation have focused on this notion of being a professional and developing yourself as an engineer or as a business person, but with the notion that there's a set of professionalism skills that go along with it that mature over time. My impression about employers is that their desire to invest in people over time used to be very high, and now,
particularly big companies,
right? And now is much, much shorter, right? That their view of the utility of a human being in their organization is like, it's faster than a fly's life cycle. So, is there a disconnect here in terms of what the employers are saying they would like to have, what we're saying we'd like to develop you as and the environment in the workplace?
I don't know. I think it probably depends on the employers. I think we all know employers that are very invested in their employees and the environment that they create, whether that's the physical or kind of the social environment that they have, and also where their workplace is too. I mean, you all talk to companies that are here in Orange County in Southern California. It's not necessarily because it's cheap, right?
Definitely not because it's cheap.
Right. But part of it is because they know to attract talent, people like living in this environment. There's something about the social environment here, the climate and other things. So yes, some companies kind of get that. I realize all companies don't necessarily get that. I think I was sharing with Marshall and you all earlier, I won't name the company, but I was told by an executive that work with companies, some of these bigger companies will hire 2,000 people knowing that to do work, knowing that they really only need 200, but they don't know which 200 that they need. So that tells me they probably don't care as much about the employees, but they're really just trying to get people in there.
It's sort of like cannon fodder.
Fungibility. Employees.
Oh my goodness. No. Absolutely no. No, I think your point is well made, and your point is well made, that the employers, because early career professionals, right? Those that are coming straight out of college, we think they know what they want to do and that they're going to go down this linear path and that they're going to end up in the C-suite, right? But really, they take that first job. Does it fit? Does it not fit? They leave 2 to 3 years out. That's what's making it difficult to do the deep investments because of the turnover. And the turnover is part of this self-discovery that we see the students going through, where they find where they really do fit and where they excel and they thrive. So I do think that's some of it. You are correct. There's not as many employers that are diving as deep. One place that you can actually look at it is in tuition reimbursements and tuition remission. How many employers are still covering the cost of either a 4-year degree or a graduate degree? And I think that's another metric that you
It's
can
going
see.
down.
It is going down.
Yeah, no, because I remember when I was teaching at Pepperdine that we had enormous numbers. I mean, basically all our students in the business school were people who were getting, paid, because you had the big aerospace companies, you had all these big companies that were still here in Southern California, and they were paying for a lot of this. And I don't think that environment is there. I also think big companies seem to be moving to particularly different regions. I don't know if you talk to your colleague, let's say in a place like Dallas, where there's been a huge boom in jobs. Did they tell you anything different? People from, growing Sunbelt cities?
Well, I just came from Miami.
Okay.
And
Well, that's a good one.
and it's growing like hotcakes, right? Everything is really exciting and dynamic there. There's a lot of startup community. But I think when you have these employers that are relocating to find new talent or to save on the cost of the building that they're having to be in, or they're redesigning what work looks like. Maybe some folks are working from home and some folks are coming to the office. I think that's part of it. I do think the development is also maybe looking sometimes to online learning at part of what's going on. And I also say some people are taking ownership of their lifelong learning, right? So college is still so relevant because the young adult is able to make mistakes in a safe environment and learn from those mistakes. It's much harder to make mistakes after you're out of school, right?
I mean, one of the things, partly goes back to one of the questions you answered earlier, but I think it partly fits in this conversation. I think one of the things we're seeing with some employers now, and at least in engineering, I don't know if they see it in business, but this idea of micro internships. Micro internships are not as much of an investment basically from a company, but they need and they want to get some of that working with young talent on very specific projects.
So they're
project-based. Yeah. And companies actually organize and make these micro internships, available to students and advertise them for companies. So it's not like as a company you have to do it on your own. You work with a third party. I think those are both good for the companies because they're more cost effective, but I think they're actually great opportunities for the students to get a quick
snapshot of what problems they're dealing with and how they actually deal with it in real life, with the interaction of people, which I think is great.
But as we're going towards the future and looking at the longer term, Marshall and I teach a class on artificial intelligence and its impact on society and business. And we had, I have to say the best teaching experience I've had since being at Chapman. Not because of Marshall, just
Oh, no, that's the only reason. But no, the students were spectacularly engaged in the topic.
And they came from every different kind of discipline. One going to medical school, several were in the HR space, some were running like warehouses and industrial facilities. And they almost without exception said that they expected AI would reduce the number of opportunities within their companies. Well, how do you, as an educational institution, deal with that reality? Certainly, one of the things that we hear is that AI is going to reduce the need for certain kinds of technical skills that are the ones that usually young people are used for. How do you train or prepare students in an AI environment for what's coming?
Oh my gosh! Like,
where do we get started?
If I can only do that.
I have so many ideas.
No, but I will go into some detail. We're looking at it very carefully. One of the passions that we're finding that our students really have is marketing. So when we started looking and diving deep into some data in the last 2 years in the 4-county area right here, the entry-level marketing jobs have declined 60%. Okay, so that's because the AI is taking on some of the functionality. So what do we have to do to help our students still get those other jobs? And then you have to remember in this local market that we are, there are other colleges, you've already named one of them, that also are producing talent. So what can we do to give our students that edge, right? The ones, there's still going to be some jobs, they're still going to be out there, but why are you the one that we should select? And so that's part of that.
So you're looking at this as kind of a musical chairs kind of situation with AI, that there's going to be still jobs there, but fewer and fewer, and you want to make sure that there are people that have the seat?
I mean, I have two thoughts on this. One is we are seeing, and I've talked to our career manager about this, we are seeing now more and more, at least in engineering and computer science, in specific job ads and qualifications, they're looking for students that have knowledge around things like AI and machine learning.
Exactly.
So I do think that's showing up as skills that they want to see. And that can be whether they took a course or they did a project, with like the one I described earlier, So I think they want to see part of that in skills. I think the other thing with AI that I think is really interesting, and I think universities and education needs to lean into this actually, is it's really compressed down the need to, whether it's number crunch or spend a lot of time writing or those other things. But what it's put the emphasis on is the front end and the back end. So AI is only going to be good if you're formulating or giving it a good prompt, right? So, and that's really what education is supposed to be doing, is getting students to think about, like, what questions are you supposed to be asking, right? Because that middle part there, whether it's programming or calculations or kind of the writing piece of it, it's going to be crunched down because of AI, and it does that, but we don't. And then on the back end, someone's going to need to be able to say whether, okay, does that make sense, or does it need to be refined also?
Well, that you're bringing up one of the points that I've been focusing on lately, which is it's almost a philosophical question about integrative education. Because if you think about prompts in AI, right, what is the right question to ask a computer to be able to get the answer that you're looking to get out at. Part of that is the engineering side of how does that actually get constructed? How do you do it iteratively? Because most people in AI are finding these days that you just don't ask one question.
Right.
You ask the first question and then you kind of refine the prompt down. But part of it is engineering, and part of it is kind of the overall sense of what context am I giving to the AI in order for it to answer. So it's not strictly a business thing. It's not strictly an engineering thing.
Yeah.
And it has actually overtones of classical philosophy that are associated with what's reality.
Yeah.
How do we deal with this question of integrativeness of learning?
I'll take that one.
Okay, go for it.
What I had thought about it in the past, when we talk generalist and we talk specialist and we talk liberal arts education, right? Your technical folks have always had a perceived, whether it was right or wrong, a perceived that they aren't people, right? They want to dive deep and they want their heads down in the data, heads down into the engineering and the science. And it was the business people that were the salespeople. They were the presenters. And what you really have to do is, if you got a heads down person, you need to help them become a heads up person. If you got a heads up person, you need to help them dive down a little deeper. So you're seeing it come closer and closer to the middle so that they are collaborative. And I think all of the integrated partnerships, and the more that we do projects, the engineering students and the business students together, where they all learn to be a little more digital savvy and at the same time maybe a little more presentation savvy, right? That the visual image may really matter. It's going to make a huge impact. So I do think it's liberal arts. There's a wonderful place in this world for liberal arts. I also think you're going to see these things in career progression. It may not be in the first 3 years out of school, but it's going to be in the next 10 and 20 years. Those that have learned to think critically and learn to ask the right questions and learn to be adaptable, which was the number one skill for the last 3 years. We've needed adaptability. That's what's going to define the career progression. And they're going to have multiple careers, right? So what do you think, Dean?
No, I agree a lot. I mean, when we think about this question, whether it's, whether we need generalists or specialists, the answer is yes, right? Because I think this idea that everyone really now needs to be digital, there needs to be digital literacy really is kind of what everyone needs to be, regardless of what your major is now, because you really can't operate in a world without digital literacy. So defining that is really kind of important. And even just like asking basic things like, how do you interact with AI? That's being digital literate, right? In different contexts. I think the other thing I find with at least our engineering and science students, since it has technology has impacted all sectors now. You think about the health sector, for instance, it's so impacted by technology now. It increases the need and also the opportunity for students to work in so many broad areas, right? So in some ways, you need to be a specialist if you're a computer science or engineering, but you also have to have some generalists in terms of like, if you need to understand, if you're working for a healthcare industry or a hospital or biotech company, you need to know something about health and medicine, right? So students, it broadens out their opportunities, but they also puts a spotlight that they need to understand the broader world.
Well, and part of that broader world is the ability to convince people to do things, right? Isn't that kind of the essence of what leadership is all about? So in a world that is becoming, this is truly, I don't know the answer to this, and I'd love your opinion on it, but in a world that seems to be becoming more AI-driven in the sense that algorithms are going to be prescribing what solutions are, right? Mm-hmm. Not just identifying something, but actually taking over and saying, oh, you're going to do this as a result of the algorithm saying this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. What is the role of leadership going to be in the future? If leadership is supposed to be leading people, Are you leading algorithms? Are you, how are we as educators kind of thinking about what that future world is going to be like?
Well, I think that's never going to go away. I hope it never goes away, because the fact that four of us are sitting in a room right now, we didn't have to, right? We could have just been on a Zoom call and had this kind of the same conversation, but more than likely it would have been a different conversation, right? So I think that the human nature of the way we operate as humans is never going to go away. And I think that leads to innovation and other really great things that make society, work the way it does. So I think that's incumbent on, going back to your question on leaders, is how do you still put that make that important for whatever you're doing, but be assisted by technology in the way it should be,
What do you think?
I think leaders do lead people, and they'll have to manage their technology. They'll have to manage their AI. I don't know that AI, and it's wonderful, and I lean into it, and I actually love it. I mean, the more the better, because it's going to make us evolve, right, and think differently. But at the end of the day, what do people want? What do people need? They want to be happy. They want to have their families. They want to have connectivity, friends, a sense of community. And I think there are ways that the AI can help build that for us, right? And help us. So when you use the word assistive, I think that's what it really is. It's an assistive technology that's going to help us evolve. Now, I made a joke the other day, and I was like, I want my assistive technology, my AI, to do my laundry. I didn't want it to take away the pleasure of either doing a beautiful painting or writing something, right? I wanted to take those kind of things away so that I had more time to dive in to the creative side. So I think that that's where a colleague of mine said he thinks we're going to have a crisis of creativity, that it may be creative problem solving, but maybe it's not necessarily in the arts, and that may be where we see some real differences, because how is that going to be impacted necessarily by AI?
Well, 'cause my big fear, coming more from a historian's point of view, is that we're going to have people who are going to essentially reflect the ignorance of the media and then reproduce it in the AI, because sometimes people send me something in the AI. I said, well, that's not really true, or it's much more complicated than that. And that's my big worry, is that everything is going to become sort of a technological solution based on some sort of common standard of mediocrity.
Yeah.
And that really worries me.
The flip side of that, by the way, is a comment I heard the other day, which stuck with me, which was that the advent of generative AI means that there's never going to be such a thing as writer's block again.
Yeah,
that you'll always be able to have a starting point
by
starting with the AI that kind of suggests something, and you go either vomit all over it, or kind of it just unleashes your creativity, so that we may not have the creative crisis that the people are talking about. But the role of AI today is going to be a whole lot different than the role of AI in the future, right? AI is evolving, which brings me to kind of the question I think we want to wrap up with, which is this notion of preparing people for life. When you think about it, there's kind of an inherent baked-in myth that you go to college, you get your degree, hopefully you have a little bit of generalism shaken together with your specialization, right? So you have a nice little stew of and that somehow that's going to prepare you for life. You go into a company. The myth used to be you're going to be in that company for life, and they're going to nurture you, and you're going to get. But there's this notion of kind of a lifelong continuum. But what we're seeing is just a series of the opposite. We're seeing disruption hits, right, in almost every industry in the world. Are we preparing people for a world that is characterized by disruption?
That's your big task as educators.
Yeah.
I think so. I think, the more innovative solutions that we come up with. I think our leadership crisis challenge that we're doing at Chapman is probably one of the best ways to show and culminate the ability to adapt, right? And to adapt at rapidly changing pace. So the leadership crisis challenge is the capstone for the seniors right now. And they come in on a Friday afternoon at 5:00 and they assume C-suite roles within a company. And then a crisis happens. This time it was a cybersecurity issue. And the technology wasn't working the way it was supposed to be. It had been hacked. And so all night they were receiving reports of what was going on, and people were trapped inside their houses and couldn't get out of their houses. They had to do a video because that should have been ready for the 11 o'clock news, right? So in real time, this is unfolding. Here's your video. And the evening, something else happens. You wake up in the morning because we're in a 24/7 world. It's no longer what you thought it was when you went to bed, and now there's a lawsuit. Right? So you're this up and down, and that's not disruptive technology, but that's
disruptive events.
That's disruptive events.
So you're training them to deal with disruption, basically.
Exactly. Then they had to do a press conference, right? They had to go before their board of directors. We had the industry folks come in and be the board of directors. So I think that's what the world has been moving so fast, that this generation has grown up with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah, part of it was, I was going to say, is the students that are going to college now, they are the students that have lived through one of the most major disruptions we've ever had, right? So that is both
the pandemic.
The pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it can be a challenge because we see some of those deficiencies sometimes in the students coming in, but it can also be an opportunity because what did they do to persevere and kind of live through that, right? They had to adapt. Everyone had to adapt, right? So you can use those, what's going on in the world right now, whether it's the pandemic or other things, as ways to show students that, yes, it's not going to be all pretty when you go out there. Things are changing pretty rapidly. And there's a lot of life events that you've lived through also. So we try to bring that into the curriculum through those experiences, like I talked about earlier, that are real life ones, and kind of put students in kind of the situations where they have to work through those experiences. I did a VR simulation example with Marshall, and I hope to do it in my class. The Mars simulation one where they're putting in a crisis, right? And how do you deal as a where you have to offload kind of a bunch of stuff from your on payload, and how do you make those decisions as a team?
So the rest of the Mars colony doesn't die.
Yeah,
right. These are really interesting.
So
scenarios.
I think having those, integrating those into the curriculum is really great because they can start to see, okay, when I get out there, there's always going to be situations. There's always going to be emergencies or disruptions that occur. But they've learned that part of that in going through college also.
Yeah, I wonder, just listening to this conversation, and by the way, I love that simulation because I was part of that myself, and I obviously love the Mars one with the VR stuff. It makes me wonder whether or not we should be rethinking what we give degrees in. Like having a degree, a bachelor's of science in adaptability, or something like that. I wonder whether or not there's going to be a wholesale rethink.
Get a doctorate in disruption.
But I'm thinking from the marketplace's perspective, right? From the businesses or the world out there. What we've described as being a profession, doctor of accounting or, masters of mechanical engineering. These were professions that have kind of process baked into it. I wonder whether there's not a new set of professions that are emerging. What do you think?
I mean, I haven't heard. I have like an outside advisory group from industry professors. I haven't heard people say that we need to move away from traditional degrees. I think it's more of how do students get those degrees, and how do those those proficiencies that we're talking about get built into those. And in engineering, we have ABET accreditation, and that becomes part of the accreditation process. They see that as valuable, those softer kind of skills to be part of your degree. So I think we want to be careful that I think there's always going to be a need for those core degrees. I kind of doubt that we're moving away from those, or I could be wrong, but I think, I would be worried about like getting into like specialized degrees, because what does it look like 5 years from now?
Yeah,
right?
because they're going to endure.
Right.
Joel, last question. Why don't we give it to you?
Okay. The last question is, okay, given what's happening now, given the problems that kids are finding getting good jobs, what do you think the future of university education is going to be? What would be the major things that you would urge our school, but also other schools, to do to prepare these kids for this disruptive environment?
Oh, wow. You turn and look at me, Marshall. I think, when we really think about the 4-year degree, and we think about a student is entering at age 18, right? 17, 19, something like that. It's hard to predict what's going to be 4 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. But what's consistent across everything is they're going to need to be able to communicate. So the more that we bake in communication skills, and they're going to have to be able to communicate in new and different platforms, new and different channels, and new and different ways. Teamwork is always going to be very highly skilled and highly valued. But what is a team? Is a team that we're all sitting around a table and talking, or is a team one person is in a time zone, 12 hours away, and another person? So I think teamwork is going to be redefined and what the goals are. But that's consistent across generations. You have your teams, you have your leadership, you have your communication skills. I think what you're going to need to add to that recipe is a commitment to incorporate technology and industry into almost every course, right? Almost every course, not just business courses, even when we talk philosophy, that if you can blend industry, what's happening in the real world, with technology, with the learning objectives, and build in structured thought processes, I think that's going to be the difference. The students need that framework, that structure. And I'm going to give y'all an example, because I was talking with the director of AI for one of our major players like Facebook. And he had his son, and he took his son to the store, and he going to buy him a toy, right? So he said, which of these two do you want, A or B? And the son said, I don't know. Let me ask my technology. And so the 8-year-old was going to let the technology tell him which toy he wanted. Yeah. And so that's our gift to the next generation, is making sure that they can still make decisions.
And not rely on
rely on the technology.
Yeah. I think I would say two things. One, and I'm going to say what they are: innovation and outcomes. I think we really need to emphasize even more what we do at the university is, and we want students to be innovative, think about, how innovation fits into their curriculum. Also, I'm going to use an example, and Marshall will know about this because he was a judge for the competition. In engineering, we do something called a make-a-thon, and we want students to kind of make things, right? Because it's not just about AI, it's also like making cool things. And I love it when students are innovative, and those innovations come from their own life experiences also. So we had a student and this was a group of 3 women. One was a student athlete, lacrosse player, and the other 2 were dancers. And what they ended up developing was basically like a smart knee brace, right? And it was because of their life experiences. They all had knee injuries.
Sure.
And the idea was that it would tell people when they're doing rehab whether they're being compliant or not, and what a great idea. And Marshall had the great comment that, well, you're going to have a baby boomer audience that's a huge audience for it, right? But I think that type of innovation is really what we want students to be. We want our students to have, because those other core skills whether those core skills end up being AI or other things. I think that's going to be an expected piece of it. But what else are they doing to show that makes them stand out? And then the last thing I would say in there is, and I do think we're trying to do more of this, and I think everyone needs to do more of this. We refer to it as a year zero student. It's the students that we're trying to recruit there, along with the parents that are invested in this too, showing to them what does it look like when they graduate and where they're going to work, the potential of how much money they might be making also. That needs to be, we're getting more and more questions from parents and students now when choosing where they're going to go to a university. They want to know more what's going to happen at year 4 also. So I think,
well, it's a financial commitment, and people are going to look at the ROI in different ways.
Yeah,
I'm glad we're focused on. Let's help you imagine what actually the future for your student is going to look like. Right? And that's great.
And hopefully, people from other schools who are listening to this, we'd love to get your feedback and maybe also see what's happening on other campuses or what companies think. That would be something that we'd like to continue with this discussion in the future.
Yeah. And to avoid a futile future,
right?
Education was traditionally the way out of that, and hopefully will continue to be. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having us.
You.
Tom,
Thank
for
you.
joining us. And thank you for joining us on the Futile Future podcast.
The futile future.